Hello! Today we are doing the fourth stage of making a stained glass piece, and that is soldering. I'm going to go over all the things you'll need before we start. So I have now copper foiled the entire piece. As you see that there are some little bit of gaps like in here and here. That's where we're going to fill it with solder to make it a solid form. So what you will need for safety is definitely gloves. The product that we are going to paint on to only the copper tape is called Flux. It can literally burn your skin. So yes, gloves are a must. I also recommend having a mask. The smell of the solder and the lead burning can get very dizzy, or you can faint or have a headache, all the above. So I definitely also recommend having you work near an open window or a ventilated area or a fan, something to keep the air circulating, because if it stays solid in one spot, it's not going to be good for your head. So that's that. And then for the products that we're going to use, I have the soldering iron itself, and then I also have a wet, damp sponge. It doesn't have to be soaking. And then you just want to kind of wipe it off a little bit, keep it clean. As you work, it'll start to get a little gunky, and you want to do that every once in a while just to keep the soldering iron clean. I have a paintbrush to work with the flux, and then I have the lead solder that we will be using to create the form and making it a one piece instead of multiple. So I'm going to get started. I open my flux and I put some in a little container. I'm going to put my doctor's mask on. Hopefully you can still hear me under it. And we'll get started. So I just put a little bit on the brush. Just has to be, very wet. And you're just going to go along the copper edge. Put a little bit in between the gaps so that way it will adhere to it. Basically, this is what makes it stick. The copper is where you want it. You don't want it on the glass, obviously, because the glass could crack, but it helps it stick onto it better when you use the flux. Alright, so I just did a couple little pieces, not too many. And we will get started. It will make a little bit of noise, so just be ready for that. And you'll see a little bit of the burning because it's the flux burning off as you're putting it on. So when you do soldering iron and lead, you want to kind of lay the lead against the back of it as you trail along, so that way it makes a solid bead. Sometimes people have to touch it up, but as best we can, we try to make a solid bead. There. So that's kind of like a bead. So what I'm doing right now is I'm actually tacking the piece. And what that means is I'm literally just putting a dot of solder and lead around each individual piece so that it becomes a solid form. I'm not doing the soldering the entire piece. I'm just tacking it so that it becomes one form, and then from there I will do the soldering throughout the entire piece. So as I show you, I'm doing tacking right now. So just that little bit will hold it together. And notice how I'm trying not to touch the glass as much as possible. So this is just the form of tacking. Now see how I'm going a little bit in a line right there? It's just to get more of pieces in there so that it becomes a solid form. Some people like to do tacking a little bit differently. Sometimes they like to do singularly just a dot of lead. I like to give a little bit elongation of tacking just so I know it's securely on there and there's no there's no way that you know it's not going to be untacked. Not what I want to do. If something like that happens, you just let it dry a little bit and take it off with there. You do not want the glass to be played with a lot because it will crack, as I've mentioned in earlier. Especially if after tacking, if you are just working on soldering the entire piece on one side and you start to have like a clump of lead, or it's not laying flat like you want it, take time, go away from that, work on the other side. Once it fully dries and is cool, then you go back and try to maintain and work that, smooth that out and do whatever you prefer with that's bothering you. You don't want to keep manhandling the one area, because then at that point the glass could easily crack and you do not want that happening. With this one, I don't really stage the colors. If anything, I just kind of go around in a circle or whatever shape your stained glass is, and then just keep going about doing it. So it'll be easy for you. Again, this is just tacking the piece. I'm not getting into the fancy details right now. You just want to make sure that each piece is connected by some part of lead so that when you pick it up, it won't have a piece laying on the ceramic tile that you didn't attach. It will stick, I shouldn't say this, but it will stick to the copper foil if you do not have the flux. It's better if you do, because it'll be more solid of a piece, and that the copper foil won't really kind of come up and start to lift off the glass, making it a piece that would not last long. So the flux is really something that you do need. If you know, the reason how you would know that you don't have flux on a glass piece is if it doesn't make that sizzling noise. If it doesn't, then you don't have flux. and I would recommend putting it on there. See that noise right there? If I have to touch the glass with the soldering iron, it is very quick. And I'll get back to the area if need be. I do not want to overheat the glass and ruin the entire process of this piece. It doesn't look very pretty right now, I know, but we are just tacking. I will smooth out all these rough edges with the soldering iron as I go about doing this. For the soldering iron temperature, I have it at 5, which is the highest it can be. It depends on what you prefer to do. Usually I prefer it to be on the highest so that it'll melt very quickly. But then with that also comes being very cautious of the glass. It will also tell you in the handout booklet that it gives you when you buy a soldering iron. At this point, I just make sure that it is all stuck, there's no loose ends, and you can actually pick it up and have it be a solid form. Let's see if I can get the light to, no, maybe not. Well, we will see definitely what the light looks like, what it looks like through the light, excuse me, as we clean it in the final stage. So that is tacking for soldering iron, and at this point, you can then start to actually solder. And that is just taking, as I said before, putting the lead behind the soldering iron and very lightly gliding it across. You want a bead of lead. You don't want to have bunches. So here I will show you in this sense. And you might need a little bit more. Just keep going over the area. If it gets too much, you want to spread it out throughout the stained glass piece. And see how I'm going about doing that. And there's a little divot right there. You kind of just use the soldering iron and just make it a little bit bead. You don't need to use the lead behind it always, like thinking that every time you touch the stained glass you need to have the lead behind it. Sometimes you use the soldering iron as just the tool itself to smooth out the edges. If it has enough lead, you don't need to put more. You don't want to have excess lead on there. Make it look very bulky. At that point I'm done with the lead. And I'm just smoothing out the edge. Like so. And you just keep going about doing this. The reason why I'm not putting more flux on there, it's got a lot of flux on there to begin with, but once in a while you're going to want to put more on because it will dry, and you want to make sure that the flux is there so that the lead can adhere to it. And that's about it, making that. And you'll do that throughout the entire piece. As you'll go about there, you'll find like little holes or little divots, smooth them out, and that way it will look good. And that's the last stage of the soldering iron, is once you have the entire piece soldered with lead, you're going to stare at it, look it over, making sure that edges are nice and smooth the way you would like them to be. There's no jagged edges. You want to do the outline of it as well, like I'm doing right now. If there's any like divots like that go in, just use a little extra lead so that goes out. At that point, when we are done and we are liking it and we don't have any more touches and touch-ups to do on this side, we will literally flip it and it will be already tacked. So we will then just do the soldering that we did before. Some of the soldering lead will come through, and you can actually use that as part of the lead for the side. So you don't use abundance of lead. It doesn't look good when it's a lot of lead. It's nice when it's much thinner. But the copper foil tape is what shows you the length of the lead. So if you do thin pieces, you have less lead to look at. So that is soldering. And after that point, I will then take wire that will not melt, so not lead, and I will bend it so that it becomes a little horseshoe, and I will stick one here and here in order so that this can be hung. You're going to want to use it on the back side, the one that's facing the window, so that you don't see it, and you're just going to put it on there with a little bit of lead. Usually I have my husband help me with this. He will hold it with tongs, and I will use the soldering iron and just tack it on there so that it is able to be held in the window. So that is the process we have for soldering. I will finish soldering this whole piece for you, back and front, and then we'll see the final stage, which is cleaning and getting it ready to go on the window. All right, thank you. Bye.